The 1956 Suez Crisis is not widely known today, but it had far-reaching consequences for Britain. In 1956, the President of Egypt, Colonel Gamal Abdel Nasser, decided to nationalize the British and French-owned Suez Canal, a vital world trade artery and vital also to the fading British Empire. Israel also wanted Colonel Nasser gone, as he was violently anti-Israeli, pro-Soviet and an Arab nationalist. And working together, Britain, France and Israel cooked up a plan to regain Western control over the canal and remove Nasser from power. On the 29th of October 1956, Israel launched a full-scale assault on Egypt through the Sinai Desert. The campaign was extremely successful, and Israeli tanks reached the Suez Canal in only 4 days. At this point, the British and French governments issued an ultimatum to both Colonel Nasser in Egypt and to Israel: withdraw 10 miles east and west of the canal, or British and French forces would intervene. It had already been agreed with Israel that they would obey the ultimatum, but Nasser would probably not, thereby giving Britain and France just cause to invade, the cover story being to restore peace in the region, but in fact to initiate regime change. Israel agreed, but Nasser did not respond. Operation Musketeer, the Anglo-French invasion of Egypt, was then activated. One of the primary targets that required capturing if the Suez Canal was to be successfully secured was El Gamil Airfield at Port Said, an old British World War II airfield. The Egyptians had blocked its runway with oil drums and other paraphernalia, ensuring that British aircraft couldn't land full of troops to assault Port Said. It was clear that the airfield would have to be captured in a daring raid by paratroopers, and what better force for such a daring job than the Parachute Regiment, among the finest troops in the world. Formed in 1942, the Paras, as they were called, had chalked up a sterling reputation in World War II, dropping first in North Africa, then in Sicily and Italy, and on D-Day in June 1944 behind the invasion beaches. Fighting to the end when surrounded at Arnhem in September 1944 during the failed Operation Market Garden, and spearheading the crossing of the Rhine into Germany in March 1945. But since the end of the war, the Paras had been employed as elite infantry, not having parachuted into action for 11 years when the Suez operation suddenly surfaced. As the crisis worsened, the 16th Parachute Brigade, containing 3 battalions of Paras, had been moved forward to Cyprus, a British island close to Egypt in the Mediterranean. When it was decided to assault the airfield, Brigadier Tubby Butler, commanding 16th Parachute Brigade, briefed Lieutenant Colonel Paul Crook, commanding 3rd Battalion the Parachute Regiment, or 3 Para, on the 1st of November 1956. The 3 Para group was ordered to conduct a parachute assault onto El Gamil Airfield. The drop zone would be narrow, bounded to the north by the Mediterranean Sea, to the south by El Manzala Lake, with the city of Port Said just to the east. Such an assault was very risky. In the past, British paratroopers had made assaults onto drop zones close but not actually on top of the target, allowing the men to land, collect their weapons and kit, and sort themselves out before marching to and assaulting the objective. This had been the case in Normandy, Holland, and during the Rhine crossings in 1944-45. But in this scenario, the Paras would be exposed to ground fire the moment they left their aircraft and would have to go instantly into action upon landing. But as the element of surprise was crucial in this operation, there was no other way. Success or failure partly depended on the strength and dispositions of the enemy defending the airfield. It was established that El Gamil was defended by at least a battalion of Egyptians. At the time, the Egyptian army was in the process of changing over from British to American and Soviet weapons and equipment. Though not highly thought of as offensive actions, the Egyptians had a good reputation for defensive fighting. On the airfield, one Egyptian company, situated in 2 large pillboxes with 2 medium machine guns, covered the flat airfield, the beachheads, where the British and French amphibious forces would come ashore the next day, to the edge of a sewage farm and some Coast Guard huts. A second Egyptian company was located in the area of a nearby cemetery, supported by 3 medium machine guns, 1 6-pounder anti-tank gun, and 4 81mm mortars. Backing up these troops were 2 3.7-inch anti-aircraft guns and 3 Soviet-built Su-100 self-propelled guns. These formidable World War II weapons were in defilade positions on the edge of the airfield. More Su-100s of the Egyptian 53rd Artillery Company were held in reserve away from the coast. A further Egyptian infantry company was deployed in a block of flats and the Coast Guard barracks. The native quarter of the city of Port Said was held in strength by the Egyptian National Guard. The British force consisted of 3 para plus a detachment of 33rd Parachute Field Regiment, the Royal Artillery armed with anti-tank guns, a troop of parachute-trained Royal Engineers, a Signal Corps, Royal Army Medical Corps and Royal Army Service Corps parachute detachments, and a specialist RAF detachment. In addition, Brigadier Butler with the Brigade Tactical Headquarters would also drop to command the British and French parachute operations. One British civilian also accompanied the parachute operation, a journalist, Peter Woods of the Daily Mirror, who persuaded the powers that be that he had jumped before and accompanied the operation. This was a lie. Woods had never jumped in his life. Finding enough transport aircraft to lift nearly 800 men onto El Gamil Airfield was difficult. 18 Valletta and 7 Hastings transports carried 3 para under Lieutenant Colonel Crook. 7 other Hastings performed the heavy drop of 6 jeeps, the anti-tank recoilless guns and heavy equipment in a second drop. The paras were extremely overloaded. Personal container loads were very heavy. Many signallers and mortar baseplate crews carried more than their own body weights. It was decided that no reserve parachutes would be carried due to weight. They had not been used in World War II anyway, and had only recently been introduced in the Parachute Regiment due to a series of training accidents. Anyway, reserves were completely superfluous, as it was decided to drop the men from about 600 feet. Another problem was marking the target for the transport aircraft. No Pathfinder drop would be made. Instead, an RAF Canberra bomber would drop a smoke bomb onto the middle of the airfield and then help guide in the transport aircraft. P hour was at 07:15 GMT. The paras were under fire as soon as they leapt out of the aircraft. There was intense ground fire, but the battalion was on the ground in 10 minutes. Only 1 man missed the airfield and ended up landing in the Mediterranean. A Company was in action straight away at the western end of the field. C Company, the middle sticks, provided battalion reserve, while B Company, the last to jump, would capture the eastern end of the drop zone and engage in intense fighting to clear the area of a sewage farm. Under machine gun, rifle and mortar fire, the paras began to organise themselves on the ground and enter combat. A patrol from A Company under Sergeant Legg stormed the airfield control tower, while No. 2 Platoon took out one of the pillboxes with a rocket launcher, killing 2 Egyptians. 9 more surrendered. B Company landed among the Egyptian positions and started to clear the Coast Guard buildings and the eastern end of the airfield. British mortars started engaging Egyptian positions behind the sewage farm. 15 minutes after landing, the air contact team from the RAF guided in the first airstrike by Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm aircraft flying off carriers. B Company set about assaulting the sewage farm, with No. 5 Platoon under Sergeant Pompey Norman taking the lead. One of the Para's anti-tank guns knocked out an Egyptian anti-tank gun, then demolished a house being used by the enemy as an observation post. B Company then secured the forward edge of the sewage farm. Next, C Company advanced through B to assault the cemetery after an airstrike. Ammunition, however, was running short. C Company stopped and dug in. At 13:15 hours, the second lift, consisting of 2 Vallettas and 5 Hastings, with D Company aboard and more ammunition, was dropped over the airfield. The British managed to knock out some of the Su-100s, but they were reinforced by the 53rd Artillery Company. The Su-100s proved stubborn adversaries. One was destroyed by a British M40 recoilless rifle. 2 were knocked out by Fleet Air Arm airstrikes or abandoned after running out of ammunition. Some of these vehicles had been dug in around the apartment buildings in Port Said and were manned by well-trained crews. The next morning, 6th of November 1956, the Egyptian Air Force made a sudden appearance. A MiG-15 carried out a low-level attack on El Gamil Airfield. One British soldier was wounded when he was struck in the head by an empty cannon case from the MiG. Royal Marines were starting to land on the beaches of Port Said town, and the Para's medium machine guns gave covering fire. The 0510 C Company sent forward a fighting patrol to occupy the cemetery without opposition. But sniper fire was coming from the block of flats and Coast Guard barracks, as well as the occasional shots from Su-100 self-propelled guns. C Company put in a 2-platoon attack that captured all the buildings without loss. However, one British patrol was cut off with 4 wounded and was rescued by the medical officer in a jeep under fire, for which he received the Military Cross for gallantry. A British anti-tank gun firing at Egyptian positions in the native shanty town set off a huge fire that consumed much of the district. The airfield was secure, and 3 Para was joined by its sister battalions, 1 and 2 Para, who landed by sea at Port Said. British Centurion tanks of the 6th Royal Tank Regiment also landed and began mopping up operations in Port Said. The intention was then to advance to Ismailia, but a ceasefire ended the fighting. Total casualties for the 3 Para group were 4 killed in action and 37 wounded. The Para's brilliant capture of Gamil Airfield was ultimately in vain, as the United States applied huge pressure on Britain and France to withdraw from Egypt, demonstrating that the power of the old European empires had been replaced as world policemen by America. The Parachute Regiment has served on in many theatres, from Northern Ireland to the Falklands War to Iraq. Gamil Airfield in 1956 was the last time they actually parachuted into combat, at least for now. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my new audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.